This episode is going to be discussing situations where some listeners might find uncomfortable or disturbing. You have been warned. We are going to be talking about a fairly recent crime. It at least happened in my lifetime, so I consider that recent.
1973.
1973. We're not doing the ghost trope game either at the end of this one for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. So you have been warned. It will be touching upon some very disturbing situations. Mm-hmm. So there's the warning out of the way. Well, welcome to Unearthly Upstate.
Welcome to Unearthly Upstate.
Yes.
Once again.
The topic is the Potato Hill Killer today. We might as well just jump right into it. There's really no way to soften the blow of this one.
Yes, okay.
I'll start reading. Up in Remsen, Boonville area, north of Utica, in the town of Steuben, the landscape is extremely hilly. The roads are a little rough, but a car can make it through. Farms and woods fill the sides of the two-lane roads. Far away, the lights of the larger cities, the two closest being Utica or Rome. The hills are a perfect place to stargaze. The roads can become a maze if your GPS decides not to work, but it's not its fault. Cell phone coverage is a bit spotty up there. But is it because the hills are so far away from major civilization? Is it because the roads all kind of look familiar? Or is it something sinister? Because these hills are full of stories, so many we won't be able to cover them in this episode. So we won't be discussing the Revolutionary War hero who's buried in the hills, or the witch doctor, or the killer rocking chair. But we will be talking about another type of horror. There are tales of a killer that stalked those woods, a hatchet man that still haunts Star Hill. The stories are right, there was a killer, but if he could haunt, it would not be Star Hill. Today we talk about Bernard Hatch.
Yes, indeed.
I didn't know about this guy until a few years back. And I don't know how familiar you were with him.
Well, I seem to remember picking up one or two stories when we moved to the Rome area.
Yeah.
And I started volunteering over at Fort Stanwix. Mm-hmm. And we got on the subject of Steuben, because there's a park up there, you know, and where he's buried, his memorial. Yeah. And
not Hatch, folks.
Not Hatch. We're talking about Steuben.
Steuben himself, yeah.
And we got on the subject of some of the history of the hills around there, Star Hill, in particular Potato Hill. Mm-hmm. And I remember in passing hearing one or two stories about there being someone who was murdered up there. And that's about as far as the stories went. They didn't extrapolate.
Yeah. For people not familiar with the area, it is extremely hilly, like I said in the intro. And there's Star Hill, which we went to quite a bit. We saw a meteor shower up on Star Hill.
There's a lovely overlook up there.
It's gorgeous up there. But, like, very close to it is Potato Hill. Mm-hmm. So some of these stories kind of get mixed in with the Star Hill mythos, I guess you could call it. There are a lot of stories of Star Hill. We will be trying to cover most of them later on. But this one happened actually over Potato Hill, which isn't that far. Mm-hmm. If you look at them on a map, they're maybe 2 miles apart, maybe. Yeah. So they're very close to each other. This is also kind of a difficult subject to talk about because the killer is still alive. Yeah. A lot of the other true crimes we're going to be talking about happened long enough ago that everybody involved has passed on. Mm-hmm. In this case, he is still alive.
Yeah, Bernard Hatch is still alive.
At the time of this recording.
In a facility in Auburn.
Oh. So, yeah, we already gave the ending away, but anybody familiar with this story knows the ending, that he is sitting in Auburn. So, it's not actually spoiler material. So, today we'll be talking about Bernard Hatch. On April 26, 1973, Mary Rose Turner, 56, and mother of 5, had a restless night. She went for a walk. She walked to a nearby gas station where a man worked there by the name of Bernard Hatch. The next time anyone saw her, her body was being dragged behind Hatch's car. According to the police report filed in Oneida County, New York, on April 26, 1973, at 5:45 p.m., Trooper J.W. Chafee interviewed James A. Weaver at his residence. The home is located on Potato Hill Road in the town of Steuben. Subjects state that about around 10 a.m. he observed a green automobile heading north on Potato Hill Road. This vehicle appeared to be towing something from the rear bumper. The object was described as being approximately 6 feet in length and light in color. Weaver stated that at the time he observed the vehicle, he was cutting brush in the field off the west side of Potato Hill Road, about 1,500 feet from the roadway. Due to the distance and noise being made by his brush cutter, he was unable to discern anything unusual nature concerning the vehicle and could not tell who or how many people occupied the vehicle, but advised he did not see the vehicle again on the road. Now, Weaver did not call the police immediately. He finished some of his chores. He went to town to get some supplies for the farm, and on the way back he noticed a trail on the road that looked like blood. He went and had his lunch, went back out on the road, then noticed what looked to be intestines along the blood trail. Then Weaver saw a conservation crew doing work nearby. He had a conversation with the crew. They had also noticed the blood trail and the intestines. They had also said it looked like something had been burned down the road. Weaver told him he was calling the police. So at this point, we're not even sure a body was being drugged behind the car. Something was drugged behind the car.
Mm-hmm.
Something left blood in the intestines. So I could see Weaver not really sure if he should call the police until after he has that conversation with some other people, because I'd be doubting myself too at that point. What did I just see?
Well, if you're familiar what
Yeah.
deer entrails look like, or
Mm-hmm.
what the entrails of an animal look like,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not certain,
Mm-hmm.
you haven't studied human anatomy, you don't know what
Yeah.
human entrails look like, and if the entrails you're seeing are unfamiliar to you,
Mm-hmm.
well, then that looks strange. That
Yeah.
looks,
So I can
something
totally
out of the
understand
ordinary.
why he waited till he talked to the the crew down there. So he finally calls the police, and when the police showed up, Weaver took them out to the road. They found more evidence, more blood and entrails, a piece of clothesline with human hair attached to it, and then at the end of the dead-end road, they found an area where items had been burned. The police were able to gather more evidence, but unfortunately they had to stop their investigation due to nightfall. If you're wondering where I'm getting such detailed information, the Oneida County website has released most of the investigation materials online. So if you feel like I'm leaving stuff out, and I will be leaving some stuff out.
yes, absolutely.
Due to self-censoring. But if you're more curious, all the evidence and police statements, most of it is online there. So this is where I'm getting this. I just thought I'd break in and explain that. So the next day, April 27th, 1973, the police returned to Potato Hill Road. The evidence gathered from the previous day showed the blood and hair were human. They did a more thorough search of the area where something had been burned and discovered coat material, a piece of Kleenex with lipstick on it, one shotgun shell, and nearby they found a woman's panties, glasses, a rosary, and a key from a hotel. And following the car tracks noted it had gone across the field and had not returned the way it came. So now you have, why he never saw the car again, because the car went over a field. So it makes you wonder who was driving the car may have noticed somebody out on there and didn't want to give him a chance to identify the car again.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, going back the way they came in.
Because it was a dead end.
Because then,
Yeah. All right. So at this point, the police had were evidence that someone might have been killed. All right. But there was no body and no missing person reports. But contacting the hotel about the key, they were given two names, and one of them was Mary Turner. Upon speaking to her landlords and her brother, it was determined that Mary Turner was missing. Also at this time, the investigation team that had been set up made a list of people of interest in the area, and one name on the list was Bernard Hatch. I am going to explain. They had a long list of possible subjects at the beginning, just by going by people that they knew of already, that they had already dealt with in other criminal cases. And I want to stress that he was just among these names. He wasn't suspect number one at this point. Nobody was suspect number one at this point.
It was very early in the investigation.
It was very early in the investigation, but his name was on there, and I'll explain why. The police were familiar with Hatch. From the police report, since his arrest by the New York State Police in 1963 for kidnapping, rape, abduction, and possession of firearms, Bernard Hatch has become well known to Troop D State Police personnel. Subject was convicted on these charges and was paroled from Attica in 1969. Hatch was considered the prime suspect in the murder of Joanne Perchione in Utica, New York in January of 1972. Hatch was also arrested on charges of rape, first degree by state police in New Hartford on March of 1972 and was acquitted by jury trial. The rape investigation stated that Hatch had picked up a woman in a green 1966 Plymouth Satellite two-door coupe, drove her north of Utica, threatened her with a knife, and raped her twice. The car described by Weaver was similar to the car owned by Hatch at the time. So again, I have to stress, Hatch was not their only suspect at the time, but he was very high on their list. He lived in the area, he worked near Mary Turner's residence, and of course, his criminal record. On April 29, 1973, a freshly dug grave with the body of a female was discovered. The police report stated that the hands and feet were severed, and the body and head were severely mutilated. The body was determined to be Mary Turner. The cause of death, asphyxiation, secondary to strangulation. Yeah, the coroner's report answered the one question in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Was she dead before she was dragged, or did she die while being dragged? And the way the coroner report is written, she was alive when he started to drag her behind the car. So there you go. There's one of the gruesome.
One of the grisly details in the case.
So she was alive, and being drugged behind the car was what killed her.
And he used laundry line.
Clothesline, yeah.
Clothesline, and I saw the photographs on the government website for Oneida County, and you don't have to think too hard about how awful that would be.
Yeah.
Around where he had another one of the grisly details of the case is where he had tied her around her body. Wasn't on one of the extremities, but because by the time that the witness had seen Hatch driving down the road with whatever it was he was dragging behind his Plymouth, Mr. Weaver, who was the witness in this case, he couldn't see any extremities, no arms or legs or anything like that. So where had he one of the more gruesome details of the case, where had he tied her up and on her body and all that?
That was a lot of questions that had to be answered.
Uh-huh.
But at this point, they have a victim. They definitely have proof of murder.
Yeah.
And even this early in the investigation, some of the other people of interest they're being taken off the list. They're following up on any tips that came in. And a good example is they were getting calls from people like saying, oh, my nut job of a neighbor over here, had yelled at her weeks ago. And so they were following up on every little detail. There was a guy who was, I think, number 2 in their minds, but when they went to interview him, I can't remember who this was exactly, but when they went to interview him, he didn't really have an alibi, but it was physically impossible for him to be in the same vicinity that Mary Turner was in at the time that she disappeared. Right. So he was taken off the list because there was just no way he could have been, responsible for it. So the list is still pretty long, but they're still taking it down, and Hatch is still on the list at this point. There is no direct connection between Hatch and Mary Turner at this point. Nobody really knew where she had disappeared. At the gas station connection had not been made at this this early. So
at this point, have they identified the victim?
Yes, they were able to identify her pretty quick, because after it was determined she was missing and they found the body, her brother was able to identify what was left. And
as the investigation progressed, the other persons of interest were slowly being taken off the list.
In May 2nd, 1973, search warrants were issued, and the trailer where Hatch lived with his mother, brother-in-law, and brother-in-law were searched. Hatch's green Plymouth was confiscated, along with many other items, including a pair of work boots that were found to have human hair on them. In May 2nd, 1973, search warrants were issued, and the trailer where Hatch lived with his mother and brother-in-law were searched. His green Plymouth was confiscated, along with many other items, including a pair of work boots. They were found to have human hair on them, hair that matched the hair that had already been found, but at this point, they still could not make any arrest. But at the same day, during more searching of the area, more clothing was found buried under a tree. Some of the clothing did belong to a woman, but there were also articles of clothing belonging to a girl. Later that day, the clothing was identified as belonging to Linda Caddy and her daughter Mary Ann Caddy. This is an interesting, I don't want to say twist, but I will say, let's just say another log was added to the fire at this point, because Linda Caddy and her daughter were on missing persons. They were listed as missing persons. And they were able to identify these articles of clothing pretty quickly. So where were these two bodies?
And what were they doing in the vicinity of Potato and Star Hill?
Near the site of this other murder. I mean, they were, looking for more evidence with the first murder, and they stumbled upon these articles of clothing.
And the police, all they have to do is, through process of elimination, find out who has a history of this kind of violence.
Right. And, so of course, now things are heating up. And the police went through and found out there are other people missing that also had ties to Hatch. The aforementioned Linda Caddy and also Hatch's former girlfriend, Lorraine Zincola, and her 3 sons. As the police started to determine where Hatch was on the night of Mary Turner's disappearance, they also followed up on the missing cases of Caddy and Zincola, especially after more evidence is found in the woods around Potato Hill. Items are linked to women and children. So they're investigating this one murder, and they start finding items that some is directly linked to a group of missing people. Other items that could be, but they can't get confirmation. All right. So finally, they get enough evidence, and in October of 1973, Hatch was arrested and charged with the murder of Mary Turner. While he's in jail waiting trial, 2 hunters find human remains. The discovery of 2 bodies on December 8th, 1973, and these turn out to be the bodies of Linda Caddy and her daughter, Mary Ann Caddy. As for Zincola and her 3 boys, their bodies have never been found.
Well, yet.
Yet, yeah. Hatch insisted that Zincola and her 3 boys had moved to Florida. He always insisted that. There's been no proof they did. There's been no proof they didn't. But it's why were some articles that could be theirs also out in the woods? We definitely did find the Codys, the missing Cody, mother and daughter, buried again, very close to where
Linda and Mary Ann Caddy.
Now you have a possibility here of how much was he involved with the other ones. Unfortunately, they don't have much evidence at this point to connect him with the other disappearances and the other possible murders. I got to use the term possible murder. A year later, almost a year later to the date where those bodies were found, just over a year actually, on December 11th, 1974, Hatch is finally put on trial for the murder of Mary Turner. If you look through the newspaper articles at that time, it's quite the show. People were hanging on this one. And yeah, you could see why. Okay. It takes 72 days to complete the trial, and he is found guilty. He is still in prison, and he has been denied parole time and time again, and his next bid for parole is in June of 2019.
So still trying to get out. But it could be a thorny issue. The Zincola case could be a thorny issue for Hatch parole. Yeah. Especially if the Zincolas are found. Especially if their remains are ever found.
It's been over 40 years now. It's going to be very difficult if they find any remains up there. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's going to be the first thing they look at. I mean, because
absolutely,
especially if they're found in the same
just
area.
As an example of any. But there are a lot of other wrenches thrown in Hatch's.
Well, the biggest one for me is he's now become a Quaker, which good for him. He found religion. Okay. But when he's asked about his criminal past, he really softens it. He said, I would just goof off with the cops, get them to chase me. And that mentions nothing about the rapes, mentions nothing about the abductions. To him, it was just being a good old boy and playing around with the cops, and they just got mean with him. And there are 2 things there prior to the murder of Mary Turner. One, he was in prison for, and he just kind of just talks it off to being boys, which to me right there just does show that, okay, they got him on the murder charge of Mary Turner, but in his mind, he really didn't commit any crime. He was just, he was
basically still in denial over his criminality.
Yeah. You're going to hear that again with another true crime we're going to be covering too, where not once does the murderer ever mention the name of the person he killed. And to him, it was all just, this arrest just kind of ruined my life. And I really think that's the issue with Bernard Hatch, and he will be denied again because
I went up to Potato Hill, and
Yeah.
some things happened.
Yeah, we did discover in the course of this that there are people who say he's innocent, and I don't know, if you read through all that evidence that's on the Oneida County website, if you think he's innocent, then you better then it's somebody who is tied to him that knew him and knew what was going on, because there is a lot of connections there to him. When they started making the connections, it was like, here's a connection. It like multiplied. It was like a Fibonacci sequence of connections. Here's one sequence that turns into two connections that turns into four.
It's difficult to
or three, whatever.
Ignore the strands of laundry line hanging off of the ball hitch of his Plymouth.
Yeah, that was one thing I left out. Yeah,
that matched the fibers on the line that was found out in the field.
Yeah,
and all the human hair.
Yeah,
that stuck on the car.
If this had happened now, how much quicker he would. I mean, he was arrested pretty quickly. That was amazing. It happened in April, and he was, 6 months later, he's sitting in jail for it. So for the time being, that was an amazing investigation and arrest. Okay, but imagine now with the use of DNA technology and all that other forensics they could use, he probably would have been sitting in jail the first time they went to his place with a search warrant.
Yeah, exactly.
They probably would have made the connection so much faster.
Once they gathered evidence, it would only take them about 72 hours for the lab to come up, or any laboratory that they would use to come up with some kind of result.
So I got to say, for the time period, this was a very thorough investigation. They did a very good job, and the turnaround was very quick. A nice aside, I don't know if you read this, but this was happening the time that they were doing the archaeological survey of Fort Stanwix before they built the reconstruction of the fort. They actually called up some of the archaeologists from that survey to go and help look for these bodies.
Oh, wow.
Find where possible graves could be on Potato Hill Road. I found that very interesting. They were pulling in everything they could. And, hats off. Yeah. Hats off to the police at this point. I mean...
Yeah, and it only took them 72 days to come up with a deliberation.
Right.
To come up
with
a guilty plea.
I didn't get to read much of the court transcripts. Bit of my fault there, but because at this point I was kind of had the heebie-jeebies, so I didn't want to read too much of them. Yeah. The stuff I did read was very interesting, like the car evidence. I mean, you were looking at the car evidence early today.
Yeah.
That was one thing that really got him, was that car. Yeah. Because every time, every time they would go look for a person of interest, one of the first things they look for is this person tied to a green car? Every one of them. Nope. That's a truck. Nope. No, that's a, I was about to say a gremlin, but I don't think gremlins were out that point.
When Weaver saw Hatch's green 1966 Plymouth Satellite coupe, and that's pretty distinctive.
Yeah, it is a distinctive car.
And not many people around that area on Star and Potato Hill owned vehicles like that.
Yeah.
So he kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. And green? Oh, my goodness.
Well, it wasn't, the cops were looking for possible subjects everywhere. I mean, they were looking for people that lived in Utica, may not have any ties to Star and Potato Hill, but could have taken somebody up there and killed them. Yeah. And like I said, they had a really long list of suspects to begin with. And like I said, they started with a list of people that were known to them, which you got to start somewhere. Yeah. And that's definitely where you'd start. But then they, as they kept taking names off the list, and they had some that were if you read through the arrest, reports and that, they had some very probable ones. But not even someone who's a better armchair criminologist than I am. Because there are some people online that, why aren't you doing this for a job? Would even go, yeah, but boy, even though this person goes up to a point, matches everything they need, there's such a big gap, and Hatch was the one who filled that gap. He was the only one that came close enough. I do remember one part they were described when they first were driving around the area. They had sent 2 patrolmen out to kind of drive around the area and kind of check it out, and they drove past the area where Hatch was living, and he had hidden the car obviously from the road. They happened to catch a glimpse of it. So this was like immediately after her death, but it was like parked in a weird spot in this homestead where it was obviously he was trying to hide it from the road.
Yeah.
And they only caught it because they happened to slow down for something, and one of them caught the glimpse of green. But then he saw them looking at the car, so they had to get out of there. You know, so I think he was aware from day one. Eyes were on him. You know, and heads off to Weaver. I mean, I can totally understand why he didn't call the cops right away. You know, because
he was out there.
He was out there brushing.
With a brush cutter.
You're out there. This guy, you know, they're loud.
The noise, and you know, and he's running it, and all you can do is. It's like watching a silent film. All you can do is just see the car going, and it's dragging something behind it.
Right.
And
you can't make out what that is, so you don't know if it's, you know, from that distance, what the heck could that have been? Because he was 1,500 yards from the road, so even then he didn't get a clear view of what was being dragged behind the vehicle.
That's quite a distance.
Yeah. So I can see why some people say Hatch is innocent because, how could he have proven what he saw? But what he saw was enough to make him keep going out to the road. And I think it was finally seeing the blood and then having to confirm it with the crew. And that crew said, yeah, we saw something similar with the blood and the entrails. I think once that confirmation was his head that something happened.
Maybe he was hauling something over the trunk area of the car and it fell off.
Yeah, I mean, there are, you know, explanations that may sound weird to some
possibilities.
People that you would convince yourself could be it. You wouldn't immediately think, he's dragging a human body behind the car.
Goes back to what I say about the mind always trying to piece together the puzzle for you so that it makes a coherent whole.
Yeah. Can I apologize right now if you're picking up any weird noises? Our neighbors are back and they're right above our room. So I apologize if anybody picked it up. And the other noise you heard was our producer, Honey, coming in to check how things were going. Sorry.
Always typical producer, always sticking their nose in where they don't belong.
And she totally
always angry about everything.
And she comes over and rubs against me, not you. Ha ha. So, okay.
Yeah, well, she's trying to tell you that you're screwing up.
Thank you, honey. We need a little bit of light in this. Anyway. There she is.
Moving on?
Yeah.
Okay. You can use Google Maps to find Star Hill and Potato Hill. And there is a pull-off spot near Star Hill that gives a great view of the valley below, and that was one of the places where we went to do stargazing.
Yes, it's as you're driving down that one stretch, it looks like it should be part of the farmland that's there. And when I think the first time we saw it, I thought maybe that's where the farmer parks his equipment, but it turns out, no, it's a pull-off for anyone to use. And there was a meteor shower. We went up there and watched the meteor shower in that area, along with about 40 other people. It's gorgeous up there.
It's lovely.
But it's also very remote and very woodsy.
And we would recommend the kind of car or truck that has good clearance. Just because sometimes the lesser traveled roads can be a bit rough.
We found that out ourselves.
The Penn Mountain State Forest.
Literally right across the street. Right across the road from where that pull-off is.
And which goes back, if I want to circle that back, to how odd it would be to see something like a two-door coupe driving down one of these roads during the early 70s. The area wasn't that developed.
No.
And most people were driving in pickup trucks, trucks of some kind, or cars that were a lot more hardy.
Yeah, although I think the first time we were up there,
two-door coupe.
We were in, I want to say we were in the Le Mans.
We were in the Elantra.
We were in the Elantra the first time we went up there, and you find out really quickly how well your wheel
it was really mad.
Some of the roads, we actually went down the wrong road. Luckily, we didn't go too far down.
It was gravel.
It was gravel and washboard out. It was bad.
So it's still kind of rough out there in some patches.
I mean, there's more paved roads up there now.
Oh, definitely, yes.
You may never have to go into any of the gravel roads. Like we said, we took the wrong turn and turned around right away. But I would recommend a car that can handle rough roads.
Definitely.
That's what I'm saying.
And you can also check out the records for this case. It's complete with photos on the Oneida County government website at www.ocgov.net, and search for Bernard Hatch.
Yep. It's under the district attorney section of the
District attorney section. Yeah.
And they also have other infamous crimes from
for
Oneida
sure,
in there,
yeah.
which I don't know if we'll cover. This one was hard enough to cover.
Yeah, it was.
But yeah, that's the Potato Hill Killer. I will say, I asked you when the first time you heard about it, and you told me I never said when I heard about it.
Oh, okay. All right.
I actually stumbled upon it online. I was researching something else, and it came up. And I remember going, holy crud, this happened not that far from us. I think we were living in Syracuse at the time. Kind of put it in the back of my head. Every so often, I'd go back to the case and kind of look at it. But, you know, his name came up for one of his paroles, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's the guy who, yeah. But I never really researched it. And then I'm working with this, it was another coworker story. And she's telling me how her and her friends would go up and look for the hatchet man.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I said, do you mean Bernard Hatch? She goes, who? She didn't know who he was. Don't you get remember, this girl's half my age. So she's in her 20s. But she grew up in Utica. Now he's become folklore. The man is not, he has not even passed away yet. He's already part of the folklore up there.
Yeah, they've already, like, horseshoed a lot of the other legends that go on in there. There's one from Happy Valley about the schoolhouse burning down that was supposedly somewhere on Star or Potato Hill along with it. But this time, the teachers burned up along with the kids.
Right.
So, you know, how legends from other areas
work their way
into one that's local.
But it's interesting
it's really
that
kind of strange.
He's part of the legend tripping, and they don't realize that he's real. He's still alive. He's still here in New York.
Yeah.
But now he's already worked his way into the folklore of the area.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of folklor in those hills. And
there's old cemeteries up there.
In fact, the last episode of the season, we will be going back to one of the more famous people for good reason.
Yes, for a good reason. Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what intrigued me, is like how he has gotten into this situation. I noticed that with Ed Gein as well, from Wisconsin. I'm not going to have to explain Ed Gein to anybody, I hope. We did live not that far from Plainfield for a while there.
One of the inspirations for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And Norman Bates. And he was. But again, I'm online, and they're collecting urban legends from high schoolers. Now, Ed Gein is pretty famous, especially you watch horror movies. You know his name is out there. Bernard Hatch, not many people would. You know, his name's not that far out there. So, but there was an urban legend being told of a cannibal that would make suits out of the skins, and they were. And these kids, you know, did not attach it to Ed Gein. They did, but they were describing Ed Gein. Yeah. And when someone said, "Are you talking about Ed Gein?" They're like, "No, this happened in Wisconsin." Because because
That's exactly where it happened.
They never made the connection between the stories they were being told, because the name was never attached to the story, that they were actually talking about a real situation. They thought it was just a good campfire story, and no, this was a real killer. And just like my young coworker talking about this hatchet man, well, his name's almost there, you know.
Yes, they just took his name Hatch, made it Hatchet, and worked
made him
into some kind of ghost story.
He's now this weird figure that haunts Potato Hill Road, which is very interesting because he's sitting in Auburn.
Even though he's presently sitting in
so
in a facility in Auburn.
That's the interesting part of folklore. And I think part of it is it's a way to soften some of this nastiness. Yeah, it's easier to believe in a crazed hatchet man that nobody sees than to discuss the actual murder, which is very disturbing on many levels.
I think it's easier on people's minds to work up these true to life, these true crime stories into a legend like that it eases the possibility of something so horrible actually happening.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to admit people can be that.
A Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah, you don't want to admit that in your head. I mean, as much as you might have days where you don't want to be around people, the last thing in your mind is, I'm standing next to a killer.
Yeah.
And not just, some random killer. So yeah, I think it's easier to develop these folklores and these legends to kind of digest that in your head. But then it goes the opposite way. Some of these folklores and legends become more outrageous than the reality, or in this case, is actually not as bad as the reality. So it is a way to soften it. It's just fascinating to me how the tales change. I mean, yeah, as you know, from the historical context, you got to start digging through all these urban legends and the internet and all that. But at the same token, isn't that a great treasure hunt to go through? I mean, you find all this stuff. And as I go through a lot of these true crime ones, as I'm researching them, a lot of times this happens, where that murderer or the victim, more often than not, it's the victim, becomes part of the legends.
Yeah,
and I'm really surprised Mary Turner.
Haunting the area.
Yeah, Mary Turner had it. She's not a ghost up there yet. Give it 10 years. And I bet she will be a ghost up there.
The woman who was drugged behind the car.
Yeah, give it about 10, 20 years. People will start seeing her ghosts. But then there's a possibility there could be 5 other ghosts up there, too.
Yes, the
caddies and the
caddies.
Zincolas.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know what? We kind of beat around the bush on this, but here's the scary part about Hatch to me. Did they stop a serial killer?
Well, I think he was already there.
Yeah.
I mean, with the Zincolas and the caddies and all the other people.
100% about the Zincolas. The caddies, good possibility.
I'm bringing in all the possibilities.
Yeah.
And with what happened.
So if he was responsible, yes,
technically
he was a serial killer at that point. But there's no proof of the other 5 that he had directly caused their deaths.
And after getting out of the service, who knows? Wasn't Hatch also in the service? But what were the details surrounding it? If you get interested, check that out.
Yeah.
And find out. I can't remember whether or not he was honorably discharged from his service in the Marine Corps or not. Because I remember something about somebody telling me that Hatch was a bit weird, even for the Marines. So they discharged him. It wasn't necessarily a dishonorable discharge, but they discharged him on some kind of psychological discharge, something like that. And
I'll have all my sources up, and a lot of them I didn't really delve deep into, because this could have been the whole season.
Yeah.
Going into it. I mean, we could have done a Making the Murderer type thing here, but there is a lot of good resources that you can just get online.
Oh, for sure.
There's some very good books out there. One that was released in 2009 by Thomas Blanchfield is called A Killer Named Hatch, Massacre on Potato Hill. He did a very good job of researching it. I would recommend that book.
It very well could have been a massacre.
Yeah,
we can only prove a couple of the murders that he committed up there.
Yeah. And
there could be more people.
I really think the police did stop a fledgling serial killer.
Yeah.
Do I think justice is served? Yes. And I don't think he's going to get paroled ever.
I don't think he belongs out on the street, honestly.
Yeah.
Even
now he's
at 70 plus, something like that, and has had all kinds of heart surgery and whatnot.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they do that.
Once you are a prisoner, you are a caretaker. The state of New York has to be your caretaker. So yeah, I think the police did a good job. They probably didn't realize it at the time, but I think they did catch a fledgling serial killer. Like I said, we don't have enough evidence to tie Hatch directly to the Codys and directly to the Zincolas' disappearance. But there's just too many possible connections there. And the fact he was already in prison for rape and abduction, and he tried
a lot
it
of
again.
Bad stuff.
Yeah, there is a history there, that man. So
definitely a history of violence there.
Yeah,
that can't be ignored.
Exactly. So yeah, if you want to read more, we're going to have everything up on the webpage. There's a lot of good information out there. I still run into people who remember the trial going on. I've talked to people who remember it happening as it happened, and them sitting there in shock, If you drive up to Remsen, this area, Remsen, Steuben area, it's so beautiful up there, and it's what you can picture the countryside should look like. You would never imagine something like that happening there, but it did. And that's probably why he will be in the public's mind long after he's gone. And more folklore would develop about it.
Absolutely. I mean, look at so many legends that have come along. Famous serial killer type figures like Jack the Ripper. He's been around since Victorian times.
Yeah. Oh God, even before Shawnee Bones, even before that.
Exactly.
Shawnee Bones, they don't even know was real.
These legends endure.
Yeah.
And captivate the imagination, morbid as they might be, and they live on.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the legend of the Potato Hill Killer is going to live on long beyond Bernard Hatch.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I think that'll do it for today.
All right.
I promise next week's will be much lighter.
Yes. Thank you for listening to this week's Extra Ghastly podcast.
Yes, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Unearthly Upstate. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, and on our webpage. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, Podbean, and Google Podcasts. Please like, share, and review, and if you really like us, tell your friends. Unearthly Upstate is an Animated Lyre Media production. The show is produced by Matt and Mari Minette, with purring provided by Honey and Lloyd. Research and writing done by Mari Minette. Music is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license. Unless stated otherwise in the episode, the places mentioned in the broadcast have not paid or contacted us for any type of promotion. And please check out our webpage for full credit and sources for the episodes.